Okay, is it good? Good. Okay, good. So it's 4 o'clock. I call the Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting to order. May I have a motion for the minutes? Move second, call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion carry. Next meeting will be on March 23rd, 4 o'clock, same place. Is there any addition to the agenda? No, seeing none, so we'll go with the agenda.
I want to add buses on Chatham Street.
Buses on Chatham Street, so I make it 5A?
5A.
Okay.
Even though I'm not a member.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, so let's go with the first item. Item number 1, housekeeping amendments to drainage, dike, and sanitary sewer system bylaw number 7551. Mr. Ho, anything to add to the report?
Mr. Chair, nothing to add. Happy to answer questions.
Okay, any questions? No? Okay, so
Move recommendation.
Move seconded. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 2, housekeeping amendments to waterworks and water rates bylaw number 5637. Again, Mr. Ho, anything to add to the report?
Mr. Chair, nothing further to add.
Okay, any questions to staff? Seeing none, so
Move recommendation.
Okay, move seconded. I call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carry. Item 3, traffic operations at number 2 row, Stevenson's Highway, and number 1 row, Francis Road, report back on referral. And Mr. Jeho, anything to add to the report?
I have nothing to add, Mr. Chair. Staff are here to answer questions.
Okay, any questions to staff? Andy?
Thanks, and through the chair. Thank you for the report. I realize that we had a presentation from the public on that. And just looking at the table on page 36, actually, for both intersections, you can see there's a decline there. So that's always good news in terms of crashes. And I apologize if I missed it, but did the RCMP or Richmond Fire have any anecdotal comments about that corner? I guess particularly too in Stevenson, where there's a fire hall right there.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, the information and the accident data that we did receive, we also received from RCMP, but not any data from Richmond Fire Rescue.
Okay, just a kind of further question to the chair. I see the activation, the pressure activation for cars during the hours that are listed in the report is typically about 3 to 4 cars. So is it technically possible or practical to have a lower number of cars activate the same intersection left turn light? And I'm thinking primarily for westbound and eastbound. So for instance, westbound traffic, perhaps it would be 2 cars activated in the morning when rush hour is going east. And so somebody turning left to go southbound on 2 Road is facing the onslaught of heavier traffic. And, you know, the opposite in the afternoon, maybe instead of 3 to 4 cars, maybe if there's 1 or 2 cars that are heading eastbound in the afternoon with most of the traffic coming westbound, to have a shorter activation requirement in terms of the number of cars. Is that practical, possible, or something that you ever do?
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, yes, definitely that is possible. Staff can change the operation of the left arrow to even activate for 1 vehicle. The option isn't recommended as it would adversely affect traffic in the prominent movement, which is eastbound in the mornings. But that is definitely possible, yes.
Yeah, the only rationale going through the back of my mind is something we probably all experience, is that when the major flow of traffic is going one way, sometimes it's really problematic for 1 or say 2 cars to get through an intersection going against the main flow of traffic. So I'll think about that some more. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Seeing none, there's a staff recommendation to receive this for information. The mover, move, seconded. Call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion carried. Moving on. Item number 4, proposed amendments to zoning bylaw 8500, section 7, parking and loading. Anything to add to the report?
Mr. Chair, I do not have anything further to add to the report, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Okay, any question? Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair to staff. The one concern I want to raise here that I've heard from numerous residents is the use of the road in front of construction projects. So when there's no space to park the loading trucks, the crane trucks, the cranes themselves, a lot of that then spills onto the roadway and then causes the traffic snarls for weeks as sections of a 2-lane road are taken up for construction of that one property. I just have concern that this amendment would result in the loss of space on the private property where it will now be moved to the public space, to roadways. Could staff comment on that concern?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, certainly to address your first comment with respect to construction activities, typically developments are required to provide a traffic management and parking plan for staff's review and approval prior to commencing any construction. So your comments would be reviewed as part of that process. With respect to the potential for adding more pressure to the street parking as a result of staff's recommendations, objective of staff's recommendations are to right-size parking facilities on site to not over-provide parking in order to encourage use of alternate modes of transportation through the provision of TDM measures. Through staff's review, if a site does have considerable on-street parking or any issues or concerns regarding that aspect, those factors would be considered as part of the amount of eligible reductions permitted for that development.
Michael, go ahead.
Okay, if I may follow through on that one then. So thank you through the chair of staff. My comment then is not so much related to the parking location on the new site. It's really like reading into this item. I see that, and others have mentioned that they see that this will lead to more use of the public space, more use of the roadway, and those traffic companies' services to provide. Is that part of the result of this amendment? Is that there will be more use of roadways?
Mr. Chair, if I could take a crack at that, through the chair to Councillor Wolf. Yeah, that's always a potential danger when we reduce the amount of required parking on a site. That's one of the reasons why we have minimums. But certainly, while we went through making these reductions, we've used a lot of data and a scientific approach to doing this. So what we found in that data is that there is an oversupply of parking right now, and I don't think that it's really a great use of space if we oversupply the parking. So really these reductions get the parking down to a right-sized amount of parking. And you're correct, there's always an opportunity for spillover parking to happen. Certainly if someone goes into a unit that doesn't have a parking spot and has a car, but in general, the parking should be right-sized through this.
Thank you. Then one final follow-up on this item. Then will this be somehow revisited in the OCP when it comes for renewal? I know that's an item in the next planning committee meeting coming up after this. But can I ask now, will, if between this being approved now and the OCP amendments, or renewal, will we be able to kind of pilot and see what these changes look like and be able to readdress it for the OCP?
Through the chair, perhaps I can tackle that one to Councillor Wolf. Yes, we, amongst other things, we do intend to look at parking rates in the OCP review. But frankly, as a starting point, we are looking at the potential to more aggressively reduce rates in key locations, well beyond the upper limit that is being suggested here. So, as part of all of the discussions on affordable housing, there's been quite a lot of talk at the council committee level around providing incentives to make housing more affordable. And we are taking that seriously, and we intend to take a long look at the potential to reduce parking. So, for instance, in areas well serviced with public transit and within close proximity to, say, Canada Line stations, we may well be recommending changes that go far beyond what you have on the table today. But to answer your question, if for some reason we think that these amendments are no longer appropriate, yes, we could undo them as part of the OCP review.
Thank you. Then to the chair, I have no further questions on this. My comment then in closing is that I will support this and will, as an ongoing process, as I've observed many high-end condos using up half of roadways to facilitate their high-density condo towers. I would hope that we maybe in the OCP, when we get to it, have maybe a sliding scale. So when places can afford to use their private property, they should. But when it's an area we want to build for more affordable housing, then you're right. We don't want to use up space that could go to those types of housing. So I appreciate all the sentiments and staff comments. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Alexa? Councillor Liu, you have to unmute yourself.
My apologies. So we are looking sort of at specific size places, which means it's also looking at specific areas in the city that this would then apply to. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu, if your question is with respect to the parking reduction with TDM, and to that point, the clause would be available to all land uses, subject to staff's review and appropriate TDMs being secured as a part of the development.
Okay, so even for like your single family house that's got the coach house?
Through the chair, this is more applicable to multifamily in city center that has close proximity to transit, walking and cycling networks.
Right, so where I'm going with this is that it's generally more around the city center. It's specific areas in town. Many of those places are already have parking regulations that require pay parking on street. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, there's more parking restrictions in our downtown core.
Okay. Where I'm going with this is I'm thinking that maybe we need to trigger that staff come back in 2 years and talk about how this has affected it, and then we would then determine whether or not it made sense to have more parking restrictions. So whether that's like, more pay parking in that specific area or not or whatever. But realistically, if we're going to provide free parking for people, I don't know what difference it makes, whether it's for people in expensive condos or cheap condos. But if we're expecting to provide free storage of people's personal property, then that's one thing. But if we want to charge people for it to actually get people out of their cars and then also have these reduction in parking, I think that's another thing. So, I'd actually like, and it's probably going to be later than this, because by the time anything actually gets built, it'd be more like 3 years out that we would see it. or maybe we just wait and see what happens with the traffic. But I do see people getting out of their cars, and I do see different options of living in a community and not needing to leave your cars all over the place. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Hobbs?
Thank you, and through the chair. Just to clarify, and I think Councillor Wolf just touched upon this. So the further incentives that we were discussing earlier, later last year, regarding incentives for marketplace, purpose-built rentals or Lemur, for instance, that is still part of the OCP review. Forgive my ignorance here, I'm just trying to catch up, because I mean, this looks good, and I appreciate the report, but I just want to make sure that we're not boxing ourselves in, and I believe Mr. Ersick already answered that, but I missed part of it, so.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, yes, that is still part of the OCP review, and the focus of those significant reductions, if in fact they are put on the table, would be to facilitate affordable rental and affordable ownership housing. So it would not be across the board. It would be for the purpose of facilitating affordability. In my experience, though, when you're talking about some market condominiums, particularly the so-called higher-end ones, developers are reluctant to reduce parking because it affects marketability. So I don't think there's very much danger that parking reductions will be given away to high-end condos. The reductions are intended to facilitate affordable units.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think market rental, affordable housing is what we're looking at in that regard. But it'll be good to see what we come up with and how the discussions go. So thank you.
Okay, good. Now, there's a staff recommendation for the amendments to be given first reading. Do you have a mover?
So moved.
A second. So call a question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carry. Good. Moving on to item number 5A, Councillor Manati.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to, it regards buses again in Steveston, and we've got referrals, but I want to make another one that we refer to staff the positioning of buses on Chatham Street east of 4th Avenue to number 1 Road with the possible opportunity to discuss with TransLink moving them along. And I can't move it or set anything. It has to be moved and seconded by somebody here.
Okay. Yes, Councillor.
I'll move it.
Hobbs, Councillor Liu. Yeah, move and second.
Being straightforward, staff are already in the process, Mr. Chairman, of talking to TransLink, but I just want to have it on the record.
Okay, very good. Any comments from staff at this point?
Mr. Chair, Councillor McNulty is correct. Staff is still working with TransLink to move these buses where they're parked on the street. We have made some progress, as you're aware that over the last number of years they've struggled to find an off-street place, but my understanding is that they have reviewed a number of options to move the buses from where they are, and my understanding is that they'll present that to staff sometime in the next couple of weeks. So I do trust this is moving along, and we'll have something more to report to committee and council in the future.
Okay, good. Councillor Hobbs.
Thanks, and through the chair. Yeah, that's good to hear. Thank you that you're making some progress on that. If they could even do one interim step, and they could probably do it themselves just with their own policy. When the buses stop on Chatham at 3rd or whatever, in both directions actually, but say facing westbound on 3rd, they pull so far up to the intersection that it's such a blocking of anybody's view trying to cross, whether you're on a bike, whether you're walking, whether you're in a car, that if they just even themselves, had some practice or policy that, and they could do this, or we could do it too with signage maybe, but where they didn't pull right up to the intersection, even if they had 1 or 1.5 bus lengths clearance back from, and you know where the intersection starts, the inside of the curbs or the inside of the sidewalks. If they were even back from that, a bus length or a bus and a half, and we could maybe help them out with that. But it's so problematic when you're pulled right up to the intersection. It's just like you have a wall to your left or to your right, but depending what you're doing. That's a real safety hazard. I don't want to see a real bad accident happening there, but I can foresee a really bad accident happening because people's view is blocked by a huge wall to their left, very close to the intersection. Just a comment. Thanks.
You got a motion?
Okay, good. So we have the motion moved and seconded. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. So any further manager's report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there is one update from transportation pertaining to the Capstan Station construction. I'd like to advise committee through you that TransLink has commenced lane closures on number 3 road in the vicinity of the construction site. That began yesterday and will continue until March 4th. There will be 1 lane of traffic in each direction of travel on number 3 road from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays. TransLink have traffic personnel out on site to assist with road operations and have notified area businesses. As well, on-site message boards are also in place to advise motorists of the current conditions on number 3 road during this time period.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Harold, I see your hand.
Yeah, I've just got a question, or a couple of questions under manager's report. I was just recently appointed by Metro Vancouver to be on the flood control committee, which is looking into the floods in the Fraser Valley and the atmospheric rivers and everything else. And we just had our first meeting at 1 o'clock this afternoon. I didn't tell them that we probably got all the problems solved that they're looking into, because everything that they're talking about in the rest of the region, we've been successful in combating, except of course getting lots of money from the federal and provincial government. So anyway, I'd appreciate some assistance with staff, maybe when we get on with the discussions further. They're going to be talking to different ones about what to do about flood control, and I think that our diking system is excellent. There's concerns and which I hadn't heard of before, that the dikes elsewhere in the valley have been rejected by the diking inspectors as not being seismic protective, and that seems to be bothering a lot of them. Anyway, I do have a question, because I was concerned a few weeks ago when the seawall washed out at Stanley Park. That was the worst storm surge off the West Dike in history. It's the first time in my lifetime I've ever seen whitecaps washing up against the West Dike. Now, it was more than a foot away from the top of the dike, but it's a warning for the future. And I'm just wondering if staff has been looking into that. We did have a proposal some years ago that staff was working on, that we worked on in 2010 with the Dutch scientists, of putting floating islands out in front and a sea berm to cut the storm surge down. But it's the first storm surge I have ever seen that came to the West Dike. The highest tide we ever had was in December 15th, 1998. It was about 1 foot from the top of the dike. This was maybe about 14 inches from the top of the dike. But the waves were scary. Half a mile or a kilometer from the dike, there's a natural sea berm that's about 3 or 4 feet tall, and that's what keeps our pasture clear. The water washed logs over top of that sea berm, took our fences down, and our field now is full of logs. First time in probably 60 or 70 years. So we're not bothered by it. We just got to clear the logs out and rebuild our fence. But my concern is, in 1998, when we had the high tide, we had a 1 foot increase in sea level rise due to El Nino. I don't know if we had an El Nino this time at all, because if we didn't, then we've got to watch it very closely. So I think that it'd be good for staff to look into it. Was there a 1 foot coastal increase in sea level because of El Nino at the time, or was this strictly a regular, what will now be a regular storm surge that when you get a strong wind, it wasn't a hurricane, it was a storm wind, but it wasn't that strong. It didn't take any trees down. It wasn't the worst storm we've ever had, but it certainly was the worst waves we've ever had. So I just want staff to be cognizant of that, and maybe you can let us know exactly what kind of tide it was. Was it an El Nino tide as well as a storm surge?
Through the chair to Councillor Steve, yes, we're certainly watching all of that and saw exactly what, while our responses and our measurement on the storm surges have identified that through this winter anyways, we haven't been seriously challenged with regards to our height of dikes, but we certainly, through this winter in the last 5 years or so, we're seeing much more significant wave setup. And it's not just coming, typically the storm surges would come through a much broader low pressure system. But we're seeing that occur with these sort of microbursts. And I think, you might have even recalled some of the news on water spouts appearing off of YBR. So we're seeing more extreme bursts of rainfall and winds. I think that's having some effect on the wave setup. We're seeing those not just hit the west dike, but the south dike as well along the arm. So getting significant wave set up just across the width of the south arm is even occurring more than it did in the past. So we're certainly cognizant of that, and we're building, measures into our design standards. You'll see the dike improvements that we're doing at the Doug Park now that we previously did between Gilbert and Number 3 Road have significant armoring to assist with the performance in that regard. And of course, embedded in the flood management strategy as adopted by Council is the recognition we need to do improvements of the berms you mentioned on sturgeon banks. Certainly, the erosion of sturgeon banks over the past decades is creating a flood protection issue for us. We need to maintain a healthy sturgeon banks and have it keep expanding along with sea level rise to ensure that the west dike continues to be protected as well as it can. So that's an ongoing piece that we're looking at the region and with the Port Authority as well to see what can be done there to enhance that. And some of those projects are already occurring. We did, the Pacific Salmon Foundation did the breach projects on the jetty to allow silt to come from the river and perhaps seed. So that's ongoing and monitoring. Petrovans proposing more of that on the Iona jetty with the Iona treatment plant project. So we're coordinating at a very high level over the years. I'm looking forward to further projects there, hopefully funded by those. But it is a key issue that we have our eye on and are hoping to.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to bring it up because I think we have to do it sooner than later in terms of the berms out in front. Oh, one other question. The port has been doing some work out there. What happened with the stuff they've added? Did it wash away, or have they got much done?
I'm not aware of the more recent work. I don't know if Milton or anybody else on right now is aware of what's happened, but we have a couple of reports that will be coming forward to committee in the coming month, and we can address that and provide more information to the committee.
That would be great. Thanks a lot.
Councillor Wolf?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I just have two question areas. One was addressed by Councillor Steed, so I just have a follow-up on that, and then I have one other thread. So the question about the flood control. Last month, I brought up the north arm of the Fraser River and the outer dike washing away that occurred near the kind of number 10 road drainage area. I don't think we've received a memo yet. Is that coming in one of the reports that was just referred to by Mr. Irving, or will that be in a manager's report at an upcoming public works meeting?
The memo was drafted. I thought it was distributed. I don't know if anybody else did, but if that got hung up in, I can certainly look into it and make sure that was distributed.
Oh, okay, great. I appreciate it. Yeah, so it was just I know some neighbors who were concerned with what they saw, but we're very thankful for the city's swift action to fill in the outer dike and make it better than it was before. So just to be sure that if that is a risky type of area, that we definitely include them in our priority areas. So, but I'll look forward to that memo. The other area, if I may, through the chair, just this week, and I thought it was kind of urgent to bring forward now, and I'm not sure who to ask, so I'm sure someone on staff will probably be able to address this, and it can be an email later. But the Hamilton community, there's a lot of road work being done and new posts being put up, and in the past they were unable to have the city banners that are part of the arts and culture program. But I think this is a public works thing, so it's that Hamilton gets the right types of posts and lighting stands and fixtures that can have the city's banners projected. Are staff aware of the type that are needed? Because in the past, apparently, Hamilton didn't have the right type that those banners could be fixed to.
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, I know there are standard types. I wasn't aware that the Hamilton community was looking at it, but we can definitely touch base with Parks Recreation and get back to council on this.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, no further questions. So to have motion to adjourn the meeting. Move second is called question. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Do we have to leave?
So we have the planning committee meeting coming up.
We can stay in this one. All right, we can stay in this one, this mode. For those that on it, we'll get staff to just quickly change and give me the thumbs up. We'll go right into our meeting. We're okay? All right, since everybody is here, we'll call to order the planning committee meeting of February 23rd. A motion on the minutes. Moved, seconded. All those in favor, contrary, carried. We will meet on March the 8th and at 4 o'clock right here in these chambers. And the first item is an application of BC Limited and BC Limited for the rezoning at 6571 and 6591 number 1 road from single detached RS1F to low density townhouses. RTL4 zone, and Mr. Craig and Robin Pallett. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Robin, where are you? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or through the chair.
Yep.
It's Robin Pallett.
Robin Pallett, thank you very much. Won't make that mistake again.
No problem.
You're looking good, though.
The purpose of this rezoning is to facilitate construction of 8 townhouse units on the subject site with vehicle access from number 1 road. The application does require a variance to the minimum lot width. And although the adjacent site to the north has declined offers to be part of this proposal, the applicant has documented their efforts to acquire the site and has also prepared a development concept illustrating how that property could be redeveloped in accordance with the OCP. The subject site will provide a statutory right-of-way over the on-site driveway to facilitate shared access with the property to the north, should it redevelop in the future. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, do you have any questions, Committee? Seeing none, moved, seconded. All those in favor? Contrary? Carried. Okay, thank you very much, staff.
Mr. Chair, I believe you may have a delegation on this.
The delegations were only, they're here, they're nodded to answer questions. They don't want to speak.
All right, thank you.
Yep, thank you. Okay, we're good. All right. The second item, community poverty reduction, we dealt with that at GP. And we have now the establishment of underlying zoning for properties under land use contracts as listed 04 all the way through to 128 in the Blundell, Seafair, and Stevenson areas and in the north portion of the city center. Mr. Craig and Ms. Lucier. Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I have nothing to add to the report, but I'd like to provide a brief introduction. You may recall that the Local Government Act requires the city to adopt underlying zoning bylaws for all properties under land use contracts by June 30th of this year. which is exactly 2 years prior to the expiration date of all land use contracts in the province on June 30th of 2024. This report brings forward 15 underlying zoning bylaws for properties under land use contracts in the Blundell, Seafair, Steveston areas, as well as in the north portion of city centre. The bylaws essentially mirror what is contained in the land use contracts and do not grant additional development rights. Should Council adopt the 15 bylaws proposed in this report, the process for establishing underlying zoning for land use contracts in the city will be completed. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'm sure there are a few here. Anybody here for questions? Okay, seeing none. Okay. Do I have a motion? Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Contrary, carried. Thank you. All right, the next item is the official community plan targeted update, proposed scope and process. And our recommendation is that we endorse the proposed scope and process for the OCP from this report of February 7th. And Mr. Hopkins, you're busy these days.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff have nothing further to add to the report, but I'd like to ask Mr. Steve Golly, who is the author of the report, to provide a brief summary.
Okay, please. Very important.
Through the chair, as noted by Mr. Hopkins, I will quickly walk the committee through key highlights of the report. Since the adoption of the official community plan in 1986, the plan has been reviewed and updated on a regular basis. For instance, over the last 5 years, the OCP has undergone several targeted amendments to keep the plan relevant and effective, including updates related to the Industrial Land Intensification Initiative, as well as introducing the Farming First strategy into the OCP. In continuing with this targeted approach to strengthening the OCP, staff are proposing a review and update to the plan under the themes resilience, equity, and adaptation that would target 6 specific areas. The major focus of the OCP update will be a deep dive into housing affordability, identified as target area 1 in the report. Richmond has a long history of successfully using traditional land use planning tools such as density bonusing and rental tenure zoning to create and retain affordable housing units. Through the OCP update, staff are proposing to move beyond a business-as-usual approach by undertaking a comprehensive rethink on how to improve housing affordability in our community. This will include an examination of regional, national, and international housing affordability models and their applicability to Richmond. The outcomes of the analysis will be a series of policies and program options for Council's consideration that Richmond will realistically employ to address housing affordability. Target Area 2 will focus on updating the OCP's social equity policies. This will include a review of policy options for providing a social equity lens to land use and physical planning concepts in the OCP. Target Area 3 will focus on environmental protection and enhancements. A key component of Target Area 3 will be reviewing environmentally sensitive area policies and strengthening linkages between the official community plan and the ecological network management strategy. Target Area 4 will focus on climate mitigation and adaptation. This target area will aim to apply a climate lens to OCP policy development and land use planning. Target Area 5 will focus on long-term planning for emerging transit technologies. Identifying and monitoring transit technologies such as demographic shifts will ensure that the OCP is a proactive and living document that is resilient and adaptable to evolving lifestyles and community needs. Final target area will focus on a series of administrative updates to the official community plan, including updating the regional context statement, establishing an action plan to guide future planning in the city's neighborhood service centers, and updating the implementation strategy for the OCP, which is proposed to include an annual progress report to Council. The OCP update will involve extensive online public consultation through Let's Talk Richmond, alongside engagement with Council advisory committees, community groups, and the development industry. Finally, the targeted update is proposed to be undertaken over 3 phases, with a scheduled completion by mid-2024. With that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Well, this is very, very key and very critical, because this can last us for and set the direction for the next 25 years. So I think, and not only that, address the here and now, all for it. Okay, I see lining up, I'm sure. Alexa, we'll go to you first.
Thank you, through the chair, to staff. Thank you for this. I think it's well laid out and it has a good plan moving forward. I am wondering a little bit about maybe sort of the way we're targeting it? Because it seems to me that it would then come in that. Does it then come in that order? You address each one sequentially?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu, no. We'll be working on them simultaneously. So when it comes to delivering, we may bring one at a time, but certainly the research and the review will deal with them all at the same time.
Okay, so like when you're going to public consultation, you'd have them all at one time, or they'd be sequential?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu, when we get to the consultation portion, we will probably break them down into those targeted areas so that we can at least focus the discussion. I would imagine that a lot of those portions of the consultation will occur kind of simultaneously. We're not necessarily going to try to end or finish one target area and then move on to the next one, because a lot of them do link with each other, so that in the end, when we do bring together a draft OCP, all of them have been kind of intertwined into a new document.
Okay. Just because sometimes, we look at pictures of other places and say we see some co-housing and some, say, 4- and 6-story buildings, and they have these shared, community spaces. They have more options for some commercial space around them, and they're sort of almost more community nodes, right? And, for us to even put those ideas out there and allow people to imagine what their neighborhood could be, and then whether or not they want that. Like, are we sort of going at it from that point of view? Because I think sometimes if we just talk about density, what does that mean to them? Like, what could it look like? It could look like this. It could look like that. Yes, maybe it's a 6-story box, but that 6-story box it's an affordable way of having housing and a community, and you've got a daycare on the bottom maybe or something. So is this like, are we sort of pushing or offering bigger ideas around this? Like certain neighborhoods might really want like a grocery store, and the way they get the grocery store is by having more density in the area and making it maybe more walkable or something else. And so, would we be presenting ideas like that of, what do you want in your neighborhood? Do you see this? Where do you live? What would you like?
Through the chair, perhaps I can tackle that, Councillor Liu. Certainly when we have conversations with neighbourhoods and the community, the discussion will be broad along those lines. We also intend to provide examples of different building development typologies so that people don't have to figure out the mechanics and the planning and the design of things on their own. They can respond to options which they're presented, which are presented to them. But, at the staff level, a lot of this OCP review is going to move beyond just physical design and land use planning. A lot of the work is going to be research-based, and it's going to focus on particularly the affordability of housing. And so much of it is going to be looking at, it's not necessarily consultation with the public that will provide some of the options and answers, but it will be research and examination of other jurisdictions, even other levels of government, because frankly, in many parts of the world, these issues are being tackled by senior government rather than municipal government. So there will be a physical consultation aspect to this, but much of the review will also be looking at the economics of development and how that translates to more affordable development for people.
Okay, because I think, I'm sure Councillor Steves and I can sit here and say, okay, if we make this 6 or 8 story passive house building and with certain size apartments in it, that's going to be more affordable than mega mansions anywhere. And so, and just your day-to-day costs will be lower, your sustainability is better. If you can put some commercial around there, now you can walk to your groceries, you don't need a car, like your whole affordability piece increases. But part of that is getting the public to wrap their head around different looking buildings in their neighborhoods, right? So,
if I may, work is already underway to develop some of those different development templates for presentation as potential options to the community. for feedback. But I'm going to say it again because a lot of this review when it comes to affordability is not just about building more of the same or building smaller to try to make it affordable, because frankly, those approaches have had mixed success to date. So some of what we will be looking at is how the new development potential that you create through your official community plan can be segregated and separated through policy, requirement, and regulation from the existing development potential. Because what we are aiming to do is to make sure that that new future development potential that the community and council creates doesn't get inflated to the same levels as current development potential. So that sounds like a long-winded thing, but basically the concern that we have is that if you just throw a bunch of new development potential into your plan, it's going to be just as affordable as the potential you already have. And there is, I think, leading edge practice in one or two cities in North America where new development potential is specifically targeted to affordability and tied to median income for ownership and for rental. So when we say that we are proposing to go beyond the norm, that is what we're talking about. We are looking at ways to manage new development potential in a different way so that it doesn't become just as unaffordable as the existing development capacity in the plan.
Thank you. And then my follow-up comment is on PLN 170. It's asking people about affordable housing contributions paid for by others. And I think it sounds good, and I think it's easy to vote for. I think it should be put in terms also of affordable housing contributions, how much that they're representing as a percentage of the total tax burden that the city collects. And so I think if people could see that what we're collecting from developers now and what that relates to as a tax burden, they can better understand sort of who is that money is being provided somehow and it's somewhere. So it is actually, going into the cost of many of these condos. And so, where does that come from? So there is a balance on the affordability piece on what people think the percentages should be. I think everyone agrees with affordable housing, but I think just putting it in a different context might get us some more robust answers from people.
Right. If I may, through the chair, we may have different opinions about to what extent the city's requirements increase and change the cost of market housing. I think we do. Certainly there's a school of thought that says that whether the city asks for less or not or more, the market price of housing remains the same. So it is a debatable point whether the city asking for less would actually create a more affordable commodity, a housing commodity. So we don't really intend to get into that to a great extent, but certainly we are intending as a staff to explore whether new development potential can be handled differently so that it is inherently an affordable product that someone on a median income could afford to either rent or buy. And as I said, there are one or two jurisdictions that are dealing with this head currently, and we intend to look at that and see whether it could be applied locally.
Okay, thank you. All right, Carol?
Thank you very much. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep,
good.
We're good.
Thank you. Well, I'm really excited about this OCP review. It can't come quick enough as far as I'm concerned. I noticed on PLN 177 that we're going to target, and the number one on the list is housing affordability. Is this a list of priorities? Because I would think that given the housing crisis, that housing affordability would have to be number one on the list.
Through the chair to Councillor Day, I guess the answer is yes. It is definitely the top priority. There's no question about it. It will be probably the largest portion of this review. We didn't necessarily put the order in priority, but there's no question about housing affordability is priority number one right now.
Good, thank you. And I'm really pleased to see that we're going to be thinking outside the box, because with the housing crisis, status quo just isn't working anymore. And I'm really pleased to see that we're looking past that old ways of doing things. Let's get creative. On page 176, you mentioned that you're going to be working with like the federal and provincial and pension funds. And I was really pleased to see that as well, because you know, I think that just working with the feds and the province to create affordable housing complexes isn't good enough, and it's not creative enough. But actually reaching out to, you know, CPP and other large pension funds to create more rental tenure housing is absolutely the way to go. It's the future. It's where it needs to go. What I'm wondering is, this is getting completed in 2024. That's 2 years from now. If something becomes glaringly obvious between now and then, can we make changes ASAP?
Through the chair to Councillor Day, certainly the 2-year time frame is an estimate. You know, if there's no sort of anything coming out of left field, I think it's definitely achievable. But however, we understand that, you know, through these reviews, they can be quite complex, and there may be a need to change the timeline, and we'd certainly update council at that point if that were to occur.
Okay, so if something comes along that just seems like a no-brainer, then you'll bring it to council before the 2024.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Day. Yeah, in those cases, there will be continuous updates to the OCP even during this review. There'll be pressing matters. We're actually dealing with referrals on market rental, for example, that we'll be bringing forward to you later on this spring that may look at some amendments to the OCP. So those type of reviews, referrals that are going on with other departments, they're still ongoing. They're not put on hold. So yeah, you'll still see some amendments coming forward to council.
Perfect. And just another question. I know a lot of this is probably going to be geared towards brand new developments, but will this process also look at, for instance, turning vacant mega homes into, you know, easier to have a secondary suite or even a duplex up-down option? I'm just wondering if this scope of this will cover things like that, because we've got a lot of empty houses. You know, when it snows and there's an entire street where not a single house is, the snow is shoveled, that these places have been sitting empty for quite some time. Will this look at those types of already built housing that could potentially be converted into something more practical?
Through the chair, perhaps I can handle that. The short answer is yes. A component will look at how you could repurpose existing large houses into multiple units, where we've already started design work to look at, for instance, on a fairly regular Richmond lot, single-family lot, we're looking at different densities that might be available without having to assemble property, because assembly often brings in speculators and flippers and inflates the cost of land. So we will be looking at a typical Richmond lot and developing development scenarios which might allow for, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 units, 7 or 8 units, 9 or 10 units. How would it fit? How would it work? How would it integrate into the existing neighbourhood? And those options would be presented for discussion with committee and council and also the community. We will also be looking at policy that differentiates potentially between residents and developers, pure developers. So, for instance, for an established resident that has a history on a property that may have intergenerational needs, housing for children, housing for parents, elderly parents, that type of thing, we're looking at policy potentially that would make options available in that situation that might not be available to the general development community. Because if we made that available to the general development community, it would actually escalate the cost of that land in those neighbourhoods. So there's a lot on the table here. Staff don't know the conclusions to all of it, but we certainly intend to explore a lot of different scenarios. And ultimately, it will be up to the community and council to decide, what you're willing to move ahead with. But we are going to look at a lot of different development scenarios.
Just one last question through the chair, if you don't want to indulge me. Would this review potentially lead to working with the provincial government on potentially changing building codes? And the reason I bring that up is, like, if someone wants to put in a basement suite, a secondary suite for a family member, one of the problems is they have to have a separate heating system. They can't have a built-in vacuum because fire could travel from one to the other. Do you think it's possible that some of those building codes could be relaxed if we worked with the provincial government?
Through the chair, perhaps I can tackle that one too. James is probably here somewhere as well. We do have some ability to accept equivalencies. So where you have an existing structure, where you can't provide physical barriers, for instance, or a completely separated system, there are provisions of ventilation, for instance. If you can't build new and have separate systems, you can have provision for dampers and that type of thing, an equivalency. So Richmond does have a history of applying a lot of that. But to answer the question, if we find something which is an impediment and we cannot work around at a municipal level, if we feel that it's an impediment to achieving flexibility in affordable housing, then yes, we would raise that with provincial government and see whether, a change would make sense and could be made.
Well, perfect. If that happens, you put us to work, okay? We'll lobby.
Got a hammer? You okay? All right, Andy?
Thanks very much.
Oh, Mr. Hobbs.
Thank you. Just looking for the button. Thank you, and to the chair. An extremely far-reaching, creative report, and I understand that it is going to take a tremendous amount of research and planning to actually execute it. So I look forward to seeing that, despite some perhaps easier wins. But one thing I do wonder about is when it comes to affordability, even for relatively well-employed people earning pretty decent salaries, it's so far out of reach for people for your average home or three-bedroom condo. That boils down to access to money, and the ability to borrow, the ability to qualify. So when we look at this, and you look at different places in the world and different jurisdictions, what are some of the blue sky notions when it comes to better enabling people to qualify for the prices that they need to qualify for to borrow money? And that's taking into account even if we're successful in bringing prices to a more affordable point. It's still going to be relatively expensive. So if you looked at different areas in the world where there's incentives, and I imagine, and this isn't a cop-out, I think it's just a reality, I imagine when it comes to access to money, that requires provincial and federal government participation, because the city of Richmond obviously cannot do that on its own.
Through the chair to Councillor Hobbs, perhaps I can tackle this one. Yes, we have been looking at various approaches and techniques that various levels of government are using and government agencies are using to try to facilitate affordability. If you think about the median family income in Richmond, it allows you to mortgage about $500,000. So the challenge for us is to have rules and regulations in place for new development potential that would deliver housing units that could be purchased around that figure. So we are currently working with land economists to see whether that's feasible, what the cost of land would have to be, construction has to be factored in. But that's really your target for for ownership housing, in order to make it affordable to a median income, you'd have to deliver it to market around the $5,000 to $6,000. Some jurisdictions are doing incredibly creative things. So, for instance, there are a number of places in the world where the government, through a housing authority, will co-own a house with you. So, if a house costs $500,000 but you can only mortgage for $4,000, the agency will own the other $100,000. So you buy 80% of the housing units, and the housing authority carries the rest. Now, we can't do that at a municipal level because we simply don't have the tax base to be doing that. But senior government does, provincial government and federal, and in many jurisdictions they do that. So, we are looking at all of these models, and some of these techniques there might be a way to apply them to Richmond, and others, I think, will just be beyond our capacity as a municipality. And then the job will become to encourage senior government to, pick up the issue and do something about it. But another technique is to separate out your new development potential and have policy that requires it to be brought to market at affordable rental rates and ownership rates. And the problem with creating new development potential in your OCP is that the market will immediately inflate the cost of that to the existing levels. And so if you create an extra 20,000 unit capacity in your OCP review, unless you have policy and rules in place to make sure that it's delivered at affordable levels, it will immediately be priced at current market levels. And usually what that means is that the value of the land goes up overnight. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So we're trying to send a signal that it's not a free-for-all. We will be exploring how do we create new development capacity, but only if it's delivered to market at price points and rent points that are truly affordable.
Can we focus on the scope and process? We're getting away of how we're doing affordable housing worldwide. So can we get our answers focused on what's on the floor? Because we'll be here all night talking about affordable housing. Mr. Hobbs, carry on.
Okay, thanks.
No, carry on. Next question.
Okay, I think that's a very important component of this. But anyway, I'll just wrap up then and say, I think that this is a very different way of approaching it, and I think it will be time consuming and a lot of research. So I look forward to seeing the results of that. But without strengthening those opportunities for basically working middle class, lower income as well, I just think it is the number one thing. So thank you very much for the report. It's very thorough. So I appreciate it.
Okay, Harold?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what some of the others are saying, except please speed it up. We're losing what now called Steveston North was built in the 70s between 1972 or 3 and 1981 or 2, and we're losing one bungalow a month. And the big mansions are going in. I talked to one of the builders, and they said they're really upset that they can't do anything else but build mansions. And this one fellow was building about 4 doors from me. They've just finished building a mansion. And he said, I can build a house across the street on south of Steveston Highway with a secondary suite in it. On the north side of Steveston Highway, I can't. The lot south of Steveston Highway is 33 feet, for Pete's sake. And they can have 2 units. The one north can't. So we've got to solve that problem pretty darn fast, because we're just getting more and more mansions. And in 2 years, at the rate they're going down, my area will be gone, and we'll have totally mansions the whole area. The other area I'd like to talk about, however, is the agricultural part of it. And while I agree that we should be raising the soil level, I'll be very cautious, because I can give you 2 instances. One was when the India Cultural Center put fill in. This is decades ago. they were going to plant lawn grass and sell lawn grass. And the soil they put in had no capillarity. The water couldn't come up. And when it rained, the water couldn't go down. So they irrigated like mad to try and get the grass to grow. And then when it dried up, because there was no capillarity, even though the water was in the soil, it didn't come up. The grass wouldn't grow. And then when it rained, the rain killed the grass. And I did the soil test for them. It was decades ago. We dug down 6 feet into the soil and filled it full of manure and compost and planted an orchard, because simply nothing would grow on the land. The other instance is the mound at the Garden City lands. I did a soil test there years ago as well. There's no capillarity in that soil, and yet that was good Sea Island soil that was put in there, but it simply packed like the Dickens. So you've got to put in soil that will allow the water to come up. As the sea level rise occurs, we will still have fresh water in the river, and it will still come through the soil of Richmond and irrigate the fields the way it does now, with fresh water on top of the salt water that will allow natural irrigation. But if you have soils that don't allow capillarity for that water to flow freely through and to rise through the soil, then you're going to have a problem growing anything. And I think you really need some scientific studies done. It's not just an engineering thing to raise the soil and put topsoil on top. You really need to understand the capillarity of the soil and how the soil works. And the other question I would have is that, from an engineering perspective, could we actually keep the rainwater in when it rains in the city, and use fresh water from the rain to maintain the water table and keep it up without filling the soil in? And could we pump water from the river to keep the salt water down? These are other ways of doing it other than putting a lot of fill in. But I think it'll probably end up being putting fill in, but we've got to solve that capillarity problem, or because effectively Metro Vancouver and the cities will not subsidize water for irrigation, and we'll have all of Richmond with soil that will need water because there's going to be drought every summer, and yet it will be impossible for the farmers to afford the water to irrigate their fields, and the capillarity will not bring the water up through the additional soil. So I'd really advise that we just don't look at this as simply something, we'll fill it in, because in my opinion it probably won't work. So I just wanted to pass that on.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Yes, thank you through the chair to committee and staff. I'll comment on the first 4 of the 6 areas, the 6 target areas in order. So the first one on housing affordability. I'm not sure, does staff have any comment on the result of the budget, the BC budget that came out yesterday, and how that is in line with what's in this report? Or are there surprises there that this report now needs to be adjusted to accommodate?
Again, I ask you to focus on scope and process.
Yeah. I know sometimes staff provide a memo on review of the budgets and stuff, so if that's coming, that you could just say that.
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, I think that will be forthcoming. We just received that information today, and we will definitely review.
Great, I appreciate that. Thanks. Through the chair, the second item of the target areas is social equity. And in there, I know it doesn't mention at this point, but I hear a lot of residents in East Richmond and Hamilton feeling that they're not equal to the rest of Richmond as a result of access to services and such. Would that be the part of the OCP that they would, those members of the public would contribute their thoughts and suggestions? Would it be in this area that they would look for services of like fresh produce?
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, perhaps I'll ask Mr. Gawley to respond to that question.
Through the chair to Councillor Wolf, the major focus of Target Area 2 social equity will be on land use and physical planning.
So access to those types of services will be something that's considered through our updating process.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, my third and of four target areas to comment on is number 3, the environmental protection and enhancement area. So there's descriptions on page 172, 173 of the report, and page 184. And so just a couple things there. I know there's no mention of biodiversity and actual enhancement. So I know enhancement is in the title, but a lot of the enhancement seems to be directed towards connecting existing sites as opposed to enhancing existing sites. So I just hope that staff can include that early on in the scope of this project, that it needs to address going beyond that. As I now mentioned, number 4 of the target areas, climate mitigation and adaptation, Council just approved the CEEP, the Community Energy and Emissions Plan, which had one of the 8 directives as enhancing green infrastructure, but it doesn't really make it a priority until 2050. So I just want to ensure that the OCP, which would be reviewed in the next few years and updated, that it would be including the actual enhancement of and protection of the peatlands, the areas that many are in ALR land, many are in other jurisdictional, like the D&D lands for the federal government, for example, and that we're actually addressing that. And then my final comment on that is I'm just a bit of concern with, it's mentioned on page 184 only, in the little table attachment 5, it mentions there under 3, the environmental protection enhancement section, the second bullet says retain consultant to update and ground truth the city's ESA mapping. Could we not actually have that in-house and have staff address that as opposed to hiring various consultants to provide reports from time to time? But could we not have a staff accountable that works with Mr. Russell, Mr. Paulin to increase the environmental sustainability department?
Through the chair, perhaps I can tackle that. We might be able to do that through a contract with a staff person. We don't currently have the capacity to do that with existing staff, but we might be able to, for instance, bring someone in on a temporary position, for a period of time to do that work. I think it's important that we do that work and we do it well, because there is, the mapping simply isn't very accurate currently. And it is important to have a better understanding of what actually exists today and for the mapping to be accurate, in addition to, frankly, having better policy to protect what's there as well.
Thank you for those comments. Thank you, Chair.
I'm just going to make a quick comment with regard to the scope and process. I agree with everything that has been set up to now. We have a visionary document with targets. I have a question. Even though you've made some suggestions, they are not all the answers, and I assume each one of these 6 areas is going to be developed further. And I guess my comment here is it sounds like, well, we're going to do the OCP and we're going to address this. Is this going to be a made in Richmond? When we did the last OCP, it was a made in Richmond OCP. And I didn't see that sort of in here. Well, we're going to address certain areas. We're 29 miles around the Lulu Island. We're only 20 miles around Sea Island. We got a few other islands. We're only so big. And I guess what I see here, redeveloping and building the future city from today, okay? And in it, I don't see anything with regard to population in there. I think we have to focus. We've never had a good census of where we are now. I think the latest figure is about 206. That's been 206 for 20 years. And Census Canada doesn't do us any favor. I would maintain we're probably about 225 to 230. Our goal is 285. Maybe the goal has to change, but I think that should be brought in here, because originally, when we did the last OCP in terms of scope and sequence, was for families. Okay, we wanted to be a family-oriented community. We're the bedroom of Vancouver, whatever, and I think that's what we're doing. I don't want to get into specifics because I agree with all of the comments in moving in that direction. But I do agree, a comment was made about equality, and Harold brought it out, when you can't subdivide in East Richmond because of certain caveats, but we can subdivide on Steveston Highway. And I think those kinds of things need to be addressed in this particular document. And we want to have livable neighborhoods. And that's something I'm thinking. One of the things I think is missing is a major public consultation. You've done a good job on the back of page 183. Let's talk Richmond. Not everybody uses a phone. Not everybody uses the iPad. I think we need to look at another way to consult in it to make livable neighborhoods. People in various areas of Richmond will talk about their neighborhood, the congestion. I can't get out of it. It takes me a half an hour now to go across town, where it used to take me 20 minutes, 10 minutes. I think that that's something we need to look at. And in here, we don't talk about infrastructure. We talk about housing, social equality, etc. How many times have we dug up Blundell for pipes? How many times have we dug up Number 3 Road? Number 3 Road is a $15–20 million road, and it's being dug up again. You know, we can't get up to Sea Island Way. I think we need to have those things in. I'm not criticizing. I'm looking at where we're going. I think they're within those targets, but they need to be, from my point, developed, and they need to be realistic. So anyhow, this is just, I will support the scope and the process. I would think if we should pass this, it just doesn't stay here. Each of these areas is further developed. I think it was mentioned earlier, memos or whatever, updates, some papers coming to us. What do you think about this? Take it to the public. This is a major, major move right now. And it's not going to solve every issue that we have and every issue the province has and the federal have, even though they have it. But I think we've got to look at, what is Richmond going to look like in 2030? 2035, for those that are going to be around, 2050. We're not far away. It's only 28 years till 2050. It's not. So those are the things I think in the scope and the process and the update will be. This will be an evolving report. And I appreciated all the comments of everybody around the table. And I hope there are more comments. How do we continue to have input to staff?
Mr. Chairman, all we're doing here is giving you an idea of the scope of the review, but the work hasn't been completed, and in each of these areas you can expect far more material and far more detail over the next period of time. The scope could also change in consultation with you and the community. But this is in broad terms the main areas that we intend to look at. And I would just say that although we intend to look very broadly for potential solutions, it will very much be a made in Richmond OCP. Great. We are not looking for generic boilerplate policy that everybody has. We are looking for real policy for Richmond that produces results.
Well, I think we've got a good starting point, and I thank the authors personally for the step in the right direction. And as I agree with everybody else, let's not wait. Let's start moving along. And hopefully it's not going to take 2 years to put together I hope it comes in phases and pieces along the way. So, anybody else like to have further comments? No? See people nodding their head. Okay, well, we have a staff recommendation on the floor.
So moved.
Second? Any further discussion? All those in favor? Contrary carried with thanks. Okay, do we have managers' reports in public? We do have an in-camera, okay? So I understand their number in camera. Anything in public? Kim? Sorry, I saw people light up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to advise committee members that the Community Dialogue Project, which is dialogue that will be happening with individuals with lived experience of homelessness, as well as with members of the public, that sessions will begin in March with individuals with lived experience and with service providers, with dialogue sessions happening in May and June with the general public. The sessions that will be held with the general public, we will have communication that will go out in April through the city website, as well as social media, and as well through our key stakeholders. And we will let council know more details through a memo as we get closer to those dates.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions of Kim? Okay, seeing none. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to provide committee with a couple of updates. Firstly, I'd like to introduce a new planner in the Policy Planning Department. His name is Babak Benia. And Babak, I don't know if you're able to put your camera on. Babak is our new planner too, who started last week. And we stole Babak from the city of Delta. And he'll be involved in managing the environmental portfolio in policy planning and assisting with other land use policy related matters. So we welcome you, Babak.
Good.
And the second update I wanted to provide to committee was about a press release from the province over the weekend on agritech in the ALR. Although it's not referenced in the press release, staff have discovered that there was a provincial order in council approved last Friday, just prior to the long weekend, to amend the ALR land use regulations to allow for intensive farming, known as vertical farming or agritech, a use that was never previously defined. So staff are reviewing the new regulations and will distribute a memo to council this week on the implications. But what I can pass along at this point is that Richmond's zoning bylaw does regulate the amount of permeable surfaces for farm buildings and greenhouses in the AG1 zone. So any application for an agritech structure would require council approval. And second, the new regulations indicate that local government can prohibit vertical farming. So more details will be found in the upcoming memo.
Okay, thanks very much. Harold? Councillor Steves? Yep. Push the button.
I think you just answered my question, because I was concerned that they would take away our right to require no concrete floors. So that will remain then, that we can require soil-based agriculture.
At this point, it appears so, yes.
Good.
Fantastic.
Okay, anything else from staff? All right, seeing none, motion to adjourn. We're adjourned. Okay.